Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Underwater Photography Show. I am Matthew Sullivan.
And I'm Alex Mustard.
And as you can see, I am back in my studio. Nice blue background, no more off-white wall. So now you also get to look at the blue patches in my glasses, but it's probably better than looking at the white wall. And I have lights again. But today, we are going to have a little catch-up episode, specifically because Alex has been doing a lot of local to him diving, which I don't believe you get to do too much of anymore. So I'm going to ask him all sorts of questions about that. He's going to tell us all about that and hopefully show us some very pretty pictures that he's been shooting.
And you've been in the cold water too, so we can't forget that.
Not quite as productive as yours, it doesn't look like, but I always like being in the cold water environments.
So where have you been diving? Well, if it's a shorter story, and what have you been shooting with?
So I did a single dive in Maine, Ariana and I did a single dive in Maine, and we did a single dive in Massachusetts. We were hoping to do more, but weather, especially up there, doesn't always cooperate.
And Massachusetts is further north, isn't it?
No, Maine's further north.
Okay.
Yeah,
I know that the Maine diving is quite similar to our diving in the UK. Yeah. Kind of a bit murky, kind of life around. A lot of the species are similar or very closely related.
Yeah. So the dive in Maine was pretty because there was boulders and there's no like kelp forest there, but they have lots of that kelp that kind of just like lays on the bottom. I don't know what it's called.
Yeah, it was sugar kelp probably, like we have. Yeah, so furbelows and things like that.
Yeah. So lots of starfish, lots of various cold water, non-tropical looking fish.
Gray, you mean?
Yeah, lots of gray, lots of brown. But we did end up, we saw some flounder and crabs and lobsters and all things like that. We saw some, of course, I was shooting wide, and the best subjects we had in Maine were macro subjects. We had lots of little gunnels and things like that.
Okay.
We missed a goosefish, which makes me very, very sad because they are a bucket list fish for me. And hearing that we missed one was just a little stab in the heart. For people who don't know goosefish, monkfish is probably the more common name for them.
We call them anglerfish as well in Europe as well. So.
Which they are. They're just a big bottom-dwelling angler, but they're flat. So we missed one of those. And then the dive in Massachusetts. Sorry, let me back up a little bit. What I found in diving up in the Northeast, and maybe it's the same where you are, is that you have to do a lot of diving to find cool things. Like there are a lot of cool things up there, but they're few and far between. And a lot of dives, like our one in Massachusetts, it's nothing but crabs. We might have seen one lobster, but it's just dozens and dozens of crabs of multiple species. So if you're a crustacean guy, I can highly recommend diving in the Northeast US. If you're into other things, just be prepared that it can take a long time to actually find anything of interest beyond crustaceans.
Yeah, and that it sounds very like our diving in the same way. But I think, what I try to bring to bear on that is, you go to specific dive sites for specific things. When life gives you lemons, you make the most of that. So, I will, if we go on a dive and, one of the local dives here, there are, loads and loads of boring everyday crabs all over the dive site, exactly like that. But I go there and like my friends who dive all the time, they're just like, why are you shooting the crabs? And I'm like, this is the site to get the best ever shots of that species because they're everywhere. And they're like, well, we're bored of it. Everyone sees those. We're searching for the one little fish no one else does. So I shoot crabs or dive. And then at the end, when they found the one rare fish, I go and photograph the rare fish as well. But actually for me, taking, really nice crab shots is part of what I'll do. And I was shooting the MFO3 and shooting crabs on that dive. And my friend who was with me, he was kind of searching for the rare stuff. And I know he's looking over at me, Terry, going, what are you doing shooting that? Like, there's super rare shrimps here. We're like, that's what we're looking for. And I'm like, oh, yeah, but this crab is just posing perfectly. I've got to get a shot.
That's the other thing, too, is if you have a cooperative subject, and like you said, if nobody's photographing those crabs, you potentially get the best shots ever of those crabs. The problem with Massachusetts and Maine is that the most common crab species is not even supposed to be there. So it's an invasive that has kind of taken over. So I typically don't even bother shooting those. But I got some nice, fine crab pictures, nothing to write home about, and none that will ever see the light of day online. But I have them if I ever get.
I'm going to share some of my crab pictures. Well, in this conversation, I'm going to have to process.
I'm sure yours are more interesting than mine. So, but the big thing that you've been, and kind of everybody who's diving into the southern UK has been interested in lately, is the explosion of common octopus, which is not something that you
the
guys
enemy of the crab.
Exactly.
You need some octopus over there. They'll wipe out those crabs for you. So I don't get to dive much at home. Scuba diving, as everyone who watches this should be very aware, is a very time-consuming activity, particularly when you're doing it from home, getting cylinders filled, driving to dive sites, unpacking, packing up, coming home, washing gear, all those things. It eats up time. And when you've got a family like I have, it's I'm traveling quite a lot anyway for work. I get plenty of dives doing that. And I just don't feel it's fair on my family to then go, oh, by the way, I'm going to go and do some local diving as well and wipe out a whole day this weekend. However, my wife and daughter are away in Sardinia for a couple of weeks. My wife's from Sardinia, so they go over there for a couple of weeks without me each summer, so my daughter can go to Italian language like summer camp on the beach. And if I'm not there, all the conversations will stay in Italian, which is good for her developing the language. And so I'm going out there at the end of next week, or the beginning of next week, and then I'll join them for a bit of a holiday at the end as well. So yeah. So anyway, while they were away, I've sort of thought, I should go out and do some diving. So I've been trying to get in the water in the UK and do a little bit of photography. The UK. Our marine life, is kind of similar to that side where you were, particularly in Maine. But we do get some changes. And one of the changes we've seen is that our water temperatures are slowly creeping up year on year as the world warms. And what's quite interesting is on the south coast of the UK, particularly the south and the southwest coast of the UK, we are getting species turning up that we never used to have. And two of those, and that is an interesting story for me. It's linked to climate change. It's also linked to ocean warming events. This year we've had a big ocean warming events in the northeast Atlantic Ocean, and that's really hitting around our shores. In July, they have a long-term temperature monitoring buoys out in the Channel. And they compare them against the historical data on those buoys. And I think at the 1st of July, the buoys that monitor the thing were between 1.5 and 3 degrees above normal temperatures. So it's like a massive amount of heat in the ocean, sadly being caused by us. But the effect it has is it allows species that the south coast of the UK is the northern end of their range to actually establish themselves. And what you don't know is whether it's kind of a 1-year recruitment event that you'll get lots of them turning up and then, you'll get a cold winter and they'll all die, or whether actually it's the beginning of those species distributions beginning to creep further forward. And one of the species that is key of that, one of the key examples of that is a lot of my friends call them blue shrimps. I call them snake lox anemone shrimps. And they're a very beautiful, very tropical looking shrimp species that we get in our snake lox anemones. And snake lox anemones are very small, smaller than your hand, small anemone with lots of small little tentacles on them. They glow a little bit in UV. So they've kind of got like a greeny, purpley, pinky tint to them underwater, which is quite attractive looking. The green is the fluorescent color coming through. And they're actually very long-lived, the anemones. They can live 50, 60 years. So they're the same ones that you see. Cold water, you get a lot of long-lived animals. It's not, it's quite cool to see. And they live perfectly happily, but these shrimps can live inside them. And back in 2007, underwater photography buddy of ours called Matt Doggett, he photographed one of these weird little shrimps on the south coast of the UK. And basically no one kind of knew what it was. And that was the first record of one ever being seen in the UK. And then within about a year or two, we all had nice shots of them in our portfolios. But they're now spreading along the coast. They were just kind of in one spot, but there's now a few more spaces that you can see them. One of the divers I was with yesterday was talking about, they can see them with eggs. So we know that they're reproducing as well here. It's not just larvae coming in from France and from the south. And so, it's a really interesting story to document and tell. And obviously it links to climate change and there's that conservation angle. Allied to that, and much more exciting than the shrimps, are that octopus are very rare in the UK. And you would very occasionally get one of the southern common octopus species here, Octopus vulgaris, which is a really, really widespread octopus species. But it likes temperate waters, but not as cold as the UK. So you get it in the Med, you get it. I think you get it all around the world. I think it's the same one you get in Florida. But it's just its range comes all the way up to our coast, and occasionally you'd get them here in the UK. You'd get one or two individuals, everyone would be super excited. This year there's been loads of them, and we don't really know whether it was just a particularly successful recruitment event, because obviously when the eggs hatch they drift in the larvae, and maybe there was perfect conditions for larval survival and you just had loads of them recruiting in, or whether it's actually the beginning of a population really beginning to establish itself here. And what we don't know at the moment is that, are they going to become a big part of British diving, or is this the one-off year when they're around? Yeah. And either way, I wanted to tell that story. And I was the best photography was back in April, before we get our spring bloom, when the plankton blooms and the water goes murky all summer. And lots of my friends who are photographers got beautiful octopus pictures back then, and I was like, oh, I wish I could go and do that. That looks amazing. And finally, I had a window where I could go diving, and so I raced off to one of the sites, a dive site in Cornwall, so in the southwest of England, called Porthcerris, and it's a very popular shore diving area, and it's been a real hotspot for octopus. But that whole coastline is full of octopus. It's really easy access there. And I went down there with my friends, Dan Bolt and Kirsty Andrews, and we just spent Saturday and Sunday last weekend just shore diving on that dive site, hunting for octopus. And it was very murky, so it was hard work finding them, but we just did the minutes. And, over those dives, we got those encounters. And actually, I should have told this more like a wildlife documentary filmmaker, but in the last 5 minutes of my dive, when I was down to not very much air, suddenly I had a fantastic encounter with them, and they're really big. Like the cold
much
water,
bigger there.
Yeah, they're real chunkers. They're really impressive to see, really cool. And yeah, I probably saw, had 15 or so encounters over those dives. And the visibility was probably a main issue of it, because it was. You couldn't really see them until you were on top of them, and then because you were suddenly on top of them, they could spook more easily than they would if you could see them a little way off and just plan your approach like you would normally with wildlife.
How big are the ones there? Because the ones we get here, and it's interesting because down in the Caribbean, the same species gets massive. Yeah. Here, the biggest one you see is maybe 20 inches tentacle tip to tentacle tip, which is not very big.
So 20 inches is foot and a half. Which is about 45 to 50 centimeters. I would say that the wingspan of these was definitely about a meter, so 3 feet.
Yeah, so
but
similar to Caribbean.
Yeah, but it's more the chunkiness of them. Just thick. Really thick in the arms, thick in the bodies. But I also have to say, I spent most of my time looking at them through my FCP lens. So actually, I'm not the best judge of how big they were, because when I did get the encounters, I was like straight into shooting.
Yeah.
And I have to say, big thank you to Erin and Backscatter Exterminator, which really, transforms some of the low visibility diving. Like my shots it was really crappy conditions. I know how to shoot in those conditions, but you're going to get backscatter shooting, animals, big wide angle animal shots in those conditions. But just, the Starling shots were decent, and with the help of the software, they look great. And, yes, I would have loved to have had the conditions. We had maybe 2 to 3 meter visibility, so 6 to 9 foot visibility. Yeah. And, earlier in the year, people were getting 12 meter visibility, so proper, 40 foot visibility. So, but actually my pictures are perfectly presentable because, saved by the software.
I also like the green, because you don't see octopus pictures like that usually. So that I think they look kind of unique in that regard as well, because obviously people watching this are seeing them, but I saw you gave me a little preview of them.
Yeah, I'll stick them in this, but yeah. And I think it was also, for me, it was important. I mean, you saw them before Backscatter Exterminator, so they weren't bad before. I sent you just a screenshot of them in Lightroom. But it was, I also wanted that because I was taking the pictures to tell that, you know, climate change related, seas warming, southern species moving up into our territory. And obviously it was important for me that the habitat that was behind them looked British, you know, which is typically green water, seaweeds and kelps and that sort of thing. And so that was really important to me. And so actually, I'm quite happy that I had that green water. It made that they're not as good for contest shots. And I know Kirsty and Dan weren't really that fussed because they'd shot them in such nice conditions earlier in the year. But actually, it worked very well for me. So, yeah.
Going back to the whole climate change things, it's interesting that because you guys have warmer water this year. I don't know how it's been in the past month and a half because I haven't been here in Florida. But before that, this whole year has been colder than normal. And you've noticed a little bit of changes in terms of things like we actually, ironically, have way more octopus here than we've had in the previous few years. Things like frogfish are actually less common than they've been in previous years. And interestingly, also down in Bonaire, where the water has been colder, they're getting striated frogfish there now, which is
really
unbelievably rare in that part of the Caribbean. And they're actually outnumbering longlore, which are the more common species down there. So it's interesting obviously climate change is happening, but it's interesting that some places are experiencing it almost in a reverse kind of way, where we're experiencing a colder than normal year. You guys are having a warmer than normal year. But because of that, things, regardless of where you are, there's changes happening with regards to, species explosions or species drop-offs, things like that. So it'll be interesting to see, like you said, if it's a blip and it's a 1 year thing and things go back to, quote unquote normal next year, or if it's a trend and we stay a bit colder, you guys stay a bit warmer. I don't know.
I think I think, there's many patterns in this. I think that the arrival of marine species is often determined by larval survival more than the conditions being suited to the adults. So, but in our case with the octopus, we know that their distribution typically stops in France. They're very much a Mediterranean species in this part of the world. But as it warms, so they can creep further north and do well in those conditions. I think that other variations can relate to lots of things. And the octopus could well just be really good, last autumn when the few that were here and had eggs, and those eggs were in the plankton, anyone who's been on Blackwater dives, you've seen larval octopus. If you have really good survival conditions for those larvae, and instead of having, tens of them landing in a bay, you have hundreds of them landing in a bay, you will get that adult population explosion the next year. And so that might be unrelated to climate change. But I think the fact that, we're right on the northern limit of a species, and we've seen with the blue shrimps or the snake locks and enemy shrimps, them pushing north as well. It is interesting, and it's why it's in the documentation side of photography is so important. It's going out and trying to tell those stories. I have been having fun as well, though. I've been, yesterday I had a good blitz of a day diving. I went with Kirsty diving to do some shallow UK diving. One of the Dorset is the county to the east of where I live. And it's actually the county where the world's first underwater photo was taken by William Thompson back in 1850s or something. Before he didn't go in the water with his camera. So he was an early, remote camera operator, pole camming. He sunk the camera down to the bottom and took a picture. We went to a dive site there called Swanage Pier, which is a very shallow little jetty running out into the water. And you dive beneath the legs of the jetty, and it's full of small subjects. Great macro dive. It was murky there yesterday, but it was alive with life, and it's just a bit like the bridges for you. It's it's not got such special creatures, but you just go in and you can, as a photographer, you go down, you never look at your air gauge because you're not going to run out. You're not going to go into any decoys. You never look at your deco gauge. You just look through your camera and shoot and shoot and shoot. And so, I really enjoyed myself down there shooting. That's one of the other sites that does have these shrimps. So I shot those a little bit. They have a type of spider crab there that lives in the anemones as well. So I was shooting those. The site's famous for photographers as a really good space for our tompot blennies. They're a large blenny species. And at Swanage, the big ones have really nice red cirri on their heads. So it's always been a favourite spot to shoot them. And Martin Edge, I know, always talked about how important it was for him when he was just developing techniques. He'd go to Swanage and he'd visit one particular blenny and just work on techniques when he was learning underwater photography. And he always says it was also really important for his mindset. Well, all his buddies were going out on the boats and going out to do more exciting dives. And he realized as a photographer that how important doing the right type of diving is for your photography. But then actually, the flip side of that is I think most underwater photographers in the UK understand now, particularly from Martin's teaching and from everyone talking about it, that it is really important to control your diving, to have that freedom. I've seen plenty of comments under these videos, people saying, oh yeah, well, I'd like to have taken a better shot of this, but I had to follow the group. And, one of the things you learn very quickly as an underwater photographer is being able to control your dives for photography is the key to success. And that means, buddying up with other underwater photographers who want to do the same thing as you, getting yourself away from group diving, understanding that maybe you will have less exciting dives because you're more focused on the photography. I mean, you'll find them more exciting, but objectively they're less exciting. But because of that focus, you can then get those better and better shots. You give yourself that freedom. And that's why I think a lot of British underwater photographers gravitate towards shore diving. And we particularly like certain sites for certain things. Like I'm saying, we went one place for octopus, another place for shrimps, another. But one of the things I like about diving with Kirsty is she's one of the few underwater photographers in the UK. And she came on the channel when we were in the Philippines together, and she really likes the normal diver diving as well, to take photos. So she's one of the few people who actually goes out and does the offshore wrecks as well as doing the shore diving. So in the evening after I made her go to Swanage all day, we went out on a dive boat last night with a load of roughy-tufty British divers going out to dive, a shipwreck, which outside a little village right on the border between the county I live in, Devon, and the next county, Dorset, in a village called Lyme Regis, which is very famous for fossils. And it was also a really big port in the 17 and 1800s. And probably before then as well. We went down and dived on that wreck last night, and the two big boilers are still intact. If you're a British diver, you get very familiar with boilers from steamships because it's the one thing that kind of survives because they're so strong. But there were so many fish down there. There were a species of fish called bib. They're kind of like a small cod, but instead of having the splotches of cod, they've got stripes on them. And they sometimes go a bit silvery and sometimes go a bit dark, but with stripes. And they tend to aggregate in sheltered areas around shipwrecks, under jetties, that sort of thing. And there were thousands of them there, in a relatively small area. And it was so cool to see so many fish. And then we also had conger eels there as well, I was photographing the bib, and suddenly they parted, and this massive head of a conger eel just came towards me. I was like, click, 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 click. Which was really, really fun. So yeah, really, really enjoyable dives. I was, shooting, basically I did all my macro with the 90mm, and I used the MFO1 and the MFO3, and I had them both on the flips. The flips do annoy me a little bit, and I think in the tropics, I'm not gonna use the flip that much, but I'm also been using this UK diving just to get myself in the zone for going to Canada as well. Yeah. And I think in Canada, I'm definitely going to use the flip because I'm not screwing the diopters on off up in Canada just because my hands will be colder and all those things. Because here our water temperatures, Swanage is probably one of our warmest dives, and there the water right now at the sort of peak of summer, it's about 18, 19 degrees. Oh, wow. So that's in Celsius. So that's kind of mid 60s.
Yeah.
And then the more outward facing sites are probably down around 15, 16 degrees, which is kind of high 50s, low 60s. Yeah. And it's a slightly warmer than usual year this year, but not massively so on the inshore sites. They do normally warm up. It's the bulk deeper water that's a bit warmer than normal. Yeah. So I was using the flips, and then for wide angle I've been using the FCP. I think particularly when I've got less, I'm visiting sites, looking for multiple species. There's an element of the unknown. It's definitely the way I prefer to be. I wouldn't want to be just restricted to full fisheye.
Yeah.
You can really get it. Like last night, I had a Tompot Blenny on the wreck that actually I passed on to Kirsty because she had the EMWL on. And it was just the most confident Tompot Blenny surrounded by dueling enemies with the wreckage behind it. And it was a really nice close focus wide angle. And I could do a pretty good job of it with the FCP, but I really, I passed it on to her with the MWL. So those are kind of my two lenses really. I've been carrying a few others in the bag with me when in the car, but I've just done every dive with those really.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, no, the FCP is very suited to our diving.
As we said in a recent episode, sometimes simpler is best. Keep it all trimmed down and not overly complicated. But so hopefully next time we record, I will have done some diving too, so we can talk more about that. And I know you've got a whole bunch of cool trips coming up, so I'm sure we'll hear, Canada specifically, which I'm excited to hear about, and all the war bonnets you see. But until then, thank you guys for watching as always. Thoughts, comments, ideas for episodes, please leave them down below this video. And we will see you guys next time.